The past 3 years have been the hardest of my life. Losing my mom shattered me in ways I didn't think possible. She wasn't just my parent. She was my anchor, my confidant, and the one person who truly understood me. When she passed, a piece of me went with her. My days became a fog of grief, and my nights were a battleground of memories and regrets. I withdrew from everyone, including my wife, Sarah, and our 2 kids, Jake and Emily. It wasn't intentional. It was survival. But they didn't understand. How could they? Their lives moved forward while I was stuck in reverse. Sarah tried it first, I'll admit. She'd ask if I wanted to talk, offer to cook my favorite meals, or suggest counseling. But my answers were always the same: I'm fine. I just need time. Eventually, she stopped asking. Conversations became about bills, schedules, and who would pick up the kids. The intimacy faded into something transactional, and though I noticed, I didn't have the strength to fix it. About a year ago, Sarah changed. It was subtle at first: a new haircut, a brighter shade of lipstick. Then it was her wardrobe, shifting from casual comfort to tailored skirts and fitted blouses that clung to her figure. She started working late more often, her team meetings conveniently aligning with my nights at home with the kids. I didn't question it at the time. Why would I? She was still my wife, the woman who'd stood by me through my darkest days. If anything, I felt guilty for dragging her into my pit of despair. And then I heard her laugh. Not the polite chuckle she gave me when I attempted a half-hearted joke, but a genuine, belly-deep laugh that made my chest tighten. It came from the living room one night while she was on the phone. I peeked around the corner, unseen, and watched as her face lit up in a way I hadn't seen in years. She was glowing. Happy. Who was that? I asked when she hung up. Just a colleague, she said, brushing past me like it was nothing. That moment stuck with me, but I pushed it down, unwilling to confront the creeping unease in my gut. Maybe she was just finding joy where she could. After all, I'd given her so little to be happy about lately. A few weeks later, my coworkers dragged me to lunch at a new cafe downtown. I wasn't in the mood for socializing, but they insisted, saying I needed to get out of the office. As we approached the entrance, I froze. There, through the massive front window, was Sarah. She was seated at a corner table, leaning in close to a man I didn't recognize. Her hand rested lightly on his forearm as he spoke, and when he laughed, she tilted her head back, exposing the curve of her neck. He reached across the table, brushing a strand of hair from her face, and then he kissed her. Time stopped. My legs turned to stone, and my breath caught in my throat. I watched as she smiled at him, a smile I hadn't seen in years. My co-workers called out to me, but their voices sounded distant, like echoes in a tunnel. I stumbled back, mumbling an excuse about forgetting something at the office, and fled before anyone could stop me. The drive home was a blur. My mind raced with 1,000 thoughts, none of them coherent. Was this real? Had I misunderstood? Maybe it was an innocent gesture between friends? But no, friends don't kiss like that. Friends don't touch each other like that. When I got home, I collapsed onto the couch, my chest heaving as I tried to process what I'd seen. Anger flared up, hot and vicious, but it was quickly snuffed out by a crushing wave of sadness. What had I done to push her away? Was it my grief? My failure as a husband? In the days that followed, I became hyper-aware of everything she did. The late nights, the sudden obsession with her appearance, the way she clutched her phone like it held the secrets of the universe. I noticed how she smiled at texts but never shared them, how she avoided eye contact when I asked about her day. One night, after she went to bed, I grabbed her phone. My hands shook as I entered the passcode, a date she hadn't bothered to change in years. But the screen was empty. No incriminating texts, no photos, no calls. It was as if she'd scrubbed it clean, knowing I might look. I felt like a fool, a paranoid, desperate fool. But deep down, I knew the truth. I could feel it in the hollow ache that had taken residence in my chest. She was cheating on me. My wife, the mother of my children, the woman I'd built a life with, was betraying me. But I couldn't bring myself to confront her. Not yet. I told myself it was for the kids, that I needed more proof before I turned the world upside down. But the truth was simpler. I was afraid. Afraid of losing her, of losing my family, of facing the reality that I wasn't enough for her anymore. So I waited, and I watched. Every night she came home late. Every time her laughter echoed through the house during another work call, I felt the cracks in our marriage widen. But I said nothing, choosing instead to endure the slow, agonizing descent into what I now realized was the role of a cuckold. And the worst part? A small, broken part of me still loved her, still hoped that I was wrong, that she'd come back to me, that we could fix this. But deep down, I knew better. After that day at the cafe, something inside me broke. I wasn't just grieving my mom anymore. I was grieving my marriage, the life I thought I had, the woman I thought loved me. It felt like being gutted alive but forced to smile through the pain for the sake of my kids. Every morning, I put on the mask of a dutiful husband and father. I packed lunches, drove carpool, and helped with homework, all while a storm raged inside me. Sarah, oblivious to my inner turmoil, carried on as if nothing had changed. Or maybe she wasn't oblivious. Maybe she just didn't care anymore. She smiled easily, laughed more often, and seemed lighter. But none of that was for me. I was a bystander in my own marriage, watching as another man enjoyed the woman I vowed to love forever. One evening, she came home later than usual. Her cheeks were flushed, her hair slightly disheveled, and her blouse had the faintest smudge of lipstick near the collar. His lipstick, not hers. I stared at her as she breezed through the kitchen, setting her purse down and kicking off her heels. She didn't even flinch under my gaze. She just looked free. "Hey," she said casually. "How was your day?" I bit the inside of my cheek, trying to suppress the tidal wave of fury bubbling up. How was my day? My day had been spent spiraling down the rabbit hole of paranoia and self-loathing, convincing myself I was a failure as a husband. And she had the audacity to act like everything was fine. "It was fine," I muttered, turning back to the stove where I was stirring a pot of spaghetti. I didn't want her to see my trembling hands. She leaned over to kiss me on the cheek, but I pulled away, just an inch, but enough to make her pause. Her smile faltered. "Is everything okay?" she asked. I wanted to scream, "No, Sarah, everything is not okay. You're sleeping with someone else while I sit here playing house." But instead I nodded. "Yeah, just tired." She gave me a strange look, like she was trying to decipher something, but after a moment, she shrugged and headed upstairs to change. I watched her go, feeling like the world's biggest coward. I hated myself for it, hated how weak I'd become. Cuckold. The word slithered through my mind like a poison. That's what I was now, a cuckold, trapped in the shadows while another man claimed what should have been mine. A few nights later, I couldn't take it anymore. I needed answers. I needed to know who this man was, how long it had been going on, and whether there was any chance in hell of saving what we had. When Sarah went to bed, I grabbed my laptop and sat at the dining room table, the soft hum of the dishwasher filling the silence. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, hesitant but desperate. I logged into our shared phone account. I'd never done this before, but I was past the point of respecting boundaries. I needed the truth. It didn't take long to find him. The same number popped up dozens of times. Late at night, during her lunch breaks, even on weekends. I traced it to a name, Jason Mitchell. I stared at the name for what felt like hours. Who the hell was Jason? I couldn't recall her ever mentioning him, but judging by the sheer number of calls and texts, he was far more than a colleague. My stomach churned as I clicked on the logs. There were hundreds of messages exchanged between them, stretching back almost a year. A year. I scrolled through the timestamps, noting how often she texted him while we were supposed to be having family time. At the park, during movie nights, even at Jake's soccer games. The realization hit me like a freight train. While I was mourning the death of my mom, she was building a secret life with another man. I was alone in my grief, and she was finding comfort in Jason's arms. The next day, I dropped the kids off at school and sat in the parking lot, staring at the steering wheel. My pulse was pounding in my ears, and my hands were clammy. I couldn't live like this anymore. I had to confront her. If I didn't, I was going to lose my mind. When I got home, Sarah was in the kitchen, sipping her coffee and scrolling through her phone. She looked up as I walked in, her face brightening for a moment before her expression shifted into something more cautious. She could sense something was off. "Can we talk?" I asked, my voice strained. Her smile faded. "Sure. What's wrong?" I motioned for her to sit at the dining table. She hesitated but complied, setting her mug down carefully like she was bracing for impact. "I know," I said, my voice cracking. "I know about Jason." Her eyes widened, and for a brief second, I saw panic flash across her face. But she quickly masked it with a calm, almost rehearsed expression. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said, but her voice wavered just enough to betray her. I slammed my hands on the table, making her jump. "Don't lie to me, Sarah. I saw you. At the cafe. I've seen the phone logs. I know you've been sneaking around behind my back for months." Her face went pale, and tears welled up in her eyes, but I wasn't sure if they were from guilt or fear of being caught. I didn't mean for this to happen," she whispered. I laughed bitterly. "You didn't mean for this to happen? What exactly didn't you mean, Sarah? The lies? The sneaking around? The part where you let another man kiss you while I stayed home, like a goddamn babysitter?" She flinched at my words, but I didn't care. "How long?" I demanded. "How long have you been cheating on me?" She stared down at her hands, her shoulders trembling. "Almost a year," she admitted, her voice barely audible. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. A year. An entire year of my life wasted on a lie. I stood up abruptly, unable to sit still any longer. I paced the room, running my hands through my hair as my mind spun. "Why?" I finally asked, my voice raw. Why now?" She hesitated before answering, her voice thick with emotion. "I was lonely," she said. You shut me out, Adam. After your mom died, you disappeared. I tried to be there for you, but you wouldn't let me in, and I was tired of feeling invisible." Her words hit me like a sledgehammer. Part of me wanted to scream that I was hurting too, that I needed her more than ever. But another part of me, the broken part, wondered if she was right. Had I driven her to this? Had my grief turned me into someone she no longer recognized? But no matter how I twisted it, nothing could justify her betrayal. Nothing could erase the image of her in Jason's arms. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, staring at the woman I once loved more than anything in the world, now a stranger wearing her face. "I'll never forgive you for this," I said, my voice low but firm. "You destroyed everything." Tears streamed down her cheeks, but I didn't care. She made her choice, and now I had to make mine. I turned and walked out of the room, knowing that whatever came next, the man I used to be was gone forever. After our confrontation, the house became a war zone of silence. We spoke only when necessary, brief, cold exchanges about the kids or groceries. Every moment in her presence felt like standing on shattered glass, each word a reminder of the life that had been ripped apart. I slept in the guest room, but sleep didn't come easily. I'd lie awake, replaying every moment of our marriage in my head, searching for the moment where everything went wrong. Sarah didn't try to explain herself further. Maybe she knew it wouldn't matter. The damage was done, and the longer I stayed in that house, the more I could feel my sanity slipping away. I wasn't just a cuckold. I was a ghost haunting my own life, watching from the sidelines as the man I used to be crumbled into dust. A week after the confrontation, I hired a private investigator. I needed more than her tearful confession. I needed to know the full, unvarnished truth. Who was Jason Mitchell? What did he have that I didn't? Why him? The investigator was efficient and discreet. Within days, I had a folder filled with everything I'd been too afraid to find out myself. Jason was one of Sarah's coworkers, a regional sales manager who joined her company a little over a year ago, right around the time her late nights at the office started. Married once, no kids, divorced after a scandal involving, you guessed it, another affair. His online presence painted him as charming and charismatic. The kind of man who probably had women eating out of his hand with a wink and a grin. There were photos, too, taken at restaurants, bars, even a weekend trip to some lakeside cabin a few months ago when I thought Sarah was away at a work retreat. She wasn't working. She was in Jason's arms, her smile brighter and more carefree than it had been in years. I stared at the photos until my vision blurred. Each image was like a dagger to the heart, twisting deeper with every detail. But the worst part? I didn't even feel anger anymore. I felt numb, empty, like there was nothing left of the man I used to be. Divorce felt inevitable. I knew that staying married to Sarah after what she'd done would destroy whatever shred of dignity I had left. But the thought of breaking up my family tore me apart. I'd always promised myself I wouldn't do to my kids what my parents did to me. I knew firsthand what it was like to grow up in a broken home, bouncing between houses, holidays spent with awkward smiles and fake pleasantries. But what was the alternative? Letting my children grow up in a house where their father was nothing more than a shell of a man, a bitter, defeated husk clinging to the illusion of a marriage that no longer existed? That wasn't living, it was slow, agonizing death. One night, after I'd put Jake and Emily to bed, I sat at the dining room table, the divorce papers spread out in front of me. I'd been staring at them for hours, pen in hand, unable to sign. It felt so final, so absolute. Across the room, Sarah stood in the doorway, watching me. She looked exhausted, her face pale, eyes rimmed with red. "Are you really going to do this?" she asked quietly. I didn't look up. "You did this, Sarah. The second you chose him over us, you made this decision for both of us." Her breath caught, and for a brief moment, I thought I saw genuine regret in her eyes. But it didn't matter anymore. Regret couldn't fix what was broken. It couldn't undo the lies or the betrayal. "I never stopped loving you," she whispered. I finally met her gaze, my own eyes dull and lifeless. "You stopped the moment you let him touch you." She started to cry, but I couldn't bring myself to care. I picked up the pen and signed my name with a heavy hand. When I set the pen down, something inside me felt lighter. Not better, not healed, but lighter. The weeks that followed were a blur of paperwork, lawyers, and difficult conversations with the kids. Telling Jake and Emily was the hardest part. Jake was old enough to understand, but Emily just cried and asked why Mommy and Daddy didn't love each other anymore. I wanted to tell her that I still loved her mother. That love wasn't the problem. But how do you explain betrayal to a 7-year-old? Sarah moved into a small apartment downtown. Jason didn't move in with her right away, though I knew it was only a matter of time. I stayed in the house for the kids' sake, but it felt empty without her. Everywhere I looked, there were memories. The dent in the wall where we'd accidentally banged the couch while rearranging furniture, the scuffed hardwood floor where Emily had taken her first steps, the kitchen where Sarah used to hum while she cooked. But those memories were tainted now, stained by the knowledge that while I was trying to hold our family together, she was off building a life with someone else. One evening, a few months after the divorce was finalized, I found myself alone in the backyard, staring up at the night sky. The kids were with Sarah for the weekend, and the house was suffocatingly quiet. I felt a deep, gnawing loneliness, the kind that doesn't go away with distractions or small talk. The kind that settles into your bones and whispers that you'll never be whole again. I pulled out my phone and stared at Sarah's contact name. I don't know why I did it. Maybe part of me hoped that if I called, she'd apologize again, that she'd beg for forgiveness, tell me she'd made a mistake, that Jason was nothing more than a passing phase. But I knew better. Instead, I deleted her contact. It felt symbolic, like erasing her name from my phone could somehow erase the pain she'd caused. But it didn't. The pain stayed, and I knew it always would. I'd like to say that I found closure, that I moved on and built a better life. But the truth is, some wounds never fully heal. I go through the motions, working, parenting, pretending I'm okay. But deep down, there's still a part of me that's stuck in that cafe, staring through the window at the moment my life unraveled. I still wonder sometimes if I could have saved us, if I could have been stronger, more present, less consumed by my grief. But then I remember that marriage is supposed to be a partnership. And when I was at my lowest, when I needed her the most, she chose someone else. The man I was before that day is gone. What's left is someone harder, colder. Maybe someday I'll learn how to trust again. But not today. Today, I'm just trying to survive.